Welcome back to Believers IAS Academy. In this today's particular video, we will be discussing about an interesting topic which is related to the judicial scrutiny of the governor's inaction over the bills reserved by him, which is passed by the state legislature. So why is it in news? It is in news because of the recent question raised by the Supreme Court asking as to why should a governor's prolonged inaction on state bills, certain important state bills under his power, which is delineated by Article 200, not be open to judicial review. And Supreme Court, alongside asking this very important question, even drew lines with respect to Article 356, which gives the governor of a state the power to recommend to the president that a situation has arisen that the constitutional machinery of that state is broken down, for which the president now has to impose precedent rule. And this particular recommendation by the governor to the president to impose precedent rule is under the judicial review of the Supreme Court, which means the recommendation given to the president can be judicially reviewed. So if the Supreme Court can judicially review this particular thing under Article 356, why can Supreme Court not question the governor's prolonged inaction on various important state bills ever since 2020? The many important state bills have been reserved by the governor of the state, especially of Tamil Nadu. So the Supreme Court has asked this critical question, which is very critical for the constitutional balance that the constitution is envisioned or envisaged towards the state and also the center. So now, why did this particular topic, what is the trigger of this particular judicial review? If you have to see, it is because of a case which rooted from Tamil Nadu's petition against its governor for sitting on various important state bills ever since 2025, and now it is 2025. So ever since last 5 years, the governor is not considering certain bills. He is neither giving assent nor he is sending it back to the legislature, but he is simply sitting, ensuring or kind of practicing pocket veto is what the problem of the Tamil Nadu's government is. And also it is with respect to another important judgment way back in 2024, exactly on April 8th, when a 2-judge bench of the Supreme Court mandated that the governors and the president, right, the governors and the president, that within 3 months they have to decide on bills, right? So this is also another important thing which is in news, and this is the trigger because on one side the governor is exercising his pocket veto, or in a way that it is pretty much like an absolute veto also, as in he is not even considering any bills, and he is just simply keeping his assent aside, saying that the entire bill, whatever has been passed, is kept for the president's consideration. So he is maintaining that pocket veto in one instance, and also on the other instance, on the other side of the coin, the Supreme Court has clearly stated that even if it is the president or the governor, they have a maximum of 3 months within which they have to decide on certain important bills. So this is where the controversy is, and this is where the tussle is between the Supreme Court and the government here with respect to the governor and the power of the governor. Now, it's also important to understand all the constitutional provisions involved in this particular case. So the very first thing is Article 200, which is very clear. It talks about the power of governor with respect to this the certain bills passed by the state legislature. One is he can give his assent, second is he can withhold his assent, third is he can reserve the bill for the president's consideration. Next, Article 356, which empowers the governor to recommend or to report a breakdown of constitutional machinery in a particular state, paving the way for president's rule, which is subject to judicial review. That is Article 356 with respect to governor. And then important article is Article 201, which talks about the president's veto power on bills which are reserved by the governor. And then we have Article 142 now talking about the Supreme Court's plenary power to ensure complete justice. So if you see all those things that we discussed in the previous slide, these are the constitutional provisions which are directly involved. And these articles are absolutely important to keep in mind. Now, and what is the argument now? So the argument with respect to this, because see, we have not hit the rock bottom here, and also we have not come to any particular conclusion. The arguments are going on till date. So this video is just like an update to what is presently happening. So what are the few arguments that are with respect to this particular issue? One, the center and some states, especially Maharashtra, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Goa, Haryana and Puducherry, argue that judiciary cannot impose deadlines on constitutional authorities, right? And then it also argues that misconduct by a governor should be dealt by the parliament, because it is a political aspect, and it has to be dealt by the parliament and not legally by courts, is what some of the states, including the center, is trying to argue. But also on the other hand, Supreme Court argues, Supreme Court's view is that questioned whether courts should remain powerless, right? So the Supreme Court is stating that although this particular thing which is completely undermining the federalism, the federal part of, or it is infringing, or it is affecting the federal part of the Indian Constitution, still the court which is, or the Supreme Court which is the guardian of the Constitution, should remain powerless, sit idle, is what the Supreme Court's view is. And also some of the famous senior advocates even quote that this is completely a political issue which has to be dealt under the parliament. Of course, those are all the arguments that we have seen. But ultimately, what is important to ensure that the Supreme Court, even in order to come to a proper understanding, the Supreme Court even cited Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, where the Supreme Court clearly stated that a proper balance is what is need to be ensured between the center and state to ensure federalism, right? So that is one important key thing to mind. And also it even clearly stated that both center and state should know its domain, know its the area of its dominance, or area of its legislature, where that clear bifurcation is understood by both center and the state to ensure that all these problems with respect to certain important constitutional provisions does not arise. Now moving on, what is the larger implication of this particular issue? Now if we see, if the Supreme Court decides in favor of the judicial scrutiny, right, the judgment could establish more accountability mechanisms for governors in terms of how certain bills of state legislature is treated. Like let's say, even if the governor is reserving certain bills to for the recommendation or for the consideration of the president, so it clearly could be more accountable, right? If the Supreme Court so gives judgment in favor of the the decision, right, it could establish more accountability in terms of how certain bills are reserved by the governor. It can also limit executive discretion and strengthen cooperative federalism, because executive discretion, here we're talking about the governor, because here the governor is the one who has the power to withhold a assent or wait, or keep it for the president's consideration. So this particular verdict, if it is in favor of the judicial scrutiny, it would help to limit the overpowering or extra power that the executive holds, and it could limit the discretion of the executive, especially the governor, and even to some extent the president, and strengthen the cooperative federalism. Third is, it could create a historic precedent where the judiciary ensures that constitutional authorities act within a reasonable time frame, as in it would help to make sure that it creates certain timelines which are supposed to be maintained or ensured by certain officers, especially the governor and the president, to make sure that constitutional authorities act within a reasonable time frame. And at the end, what is the way forward from this particular topic? One is to ensure that the parliament, right, or even the Supreme Court, it could come up with some particular timeline, clear timeline stating a practical timeline, right? Because earlier Supreme Court stated that 3 months as a deadline within which the bill needs to be addressed or should be met, dealt with. But now it can be even more, it can be made even more practical by the Parliament and also the Supreme Court, where it could specify a reasonable time in order to make sure that actions are taken on the particular bill. Stronger conventions means few conventions had to be developed by the state legislation, or even for that, the state legislature, or even for that matter Parliament, to ensure that certain bills are given timely attention, right? It could even in terms of giving an assent, or even in terms of returning back the assent, because everything and anything that has to be changed in the constitution, you cannot expect that it has to happen from a constitutional amendment act. So it is important that certain conventions are built within the house, within the Parliament, even within the state legislative assemblies, to ensure that timely assent could prevent friction between the executive and the legislature. And then institutional checks, mechanisms for accountability without eroding governor's constitutional state, because it is important that the office of governor should also be respected, right? So just because we need to bring certain reforms or changes in terms of how the accountability of the functions or the powers of governor is met, doesn't mean that we erode the entire constitutional power granted to the office of governor, right? So these are the three important things. Anyway, that's all for this particular video. For more such interesting content, please do subscribe Believers YouTube channel. Signing off, this is Madan Gopal. Have a beautiful day.